Caribbean pirates, the true history behind the legend. Asleep in Class. Welcome or welcome back to Asleep in Class, where we settle into long, quiet lectures about history, science, invention, civilization, and the strange paths of human knowledge. This episode follows the real Caribbean pirates through the distance between sea legend and historical truth. We will move through imperial treasure routes, privateers, buccaneers, black flags, Nassau, Blackbeard, shipboard life, violence, survival, and the long afterlife of the pirate myth. This is a calm journey through the true history behind one of the most enduring maritime legends ever created, before the black flag became a legend. Before the black flag became one of history's most recognizable symbols, the Caribbean was already a place of empire, extraction, wind, disease, forced labor, and danger. The pirate story did not begin with buried treasure or laughing men in taverns. It began with ships crossing warm water between islands, ports, reefs, storms, and empires that were fighting over the wealth of the Americas. The sea was beautiful, but it was never empty. It was crossed by Spanish treasure fleets, enslaved people, soldiers, sailors, merchants, smugglers, privateers, fishermen, and desperate men looking for a way out of ordinary obedience. The Caribbean became central to European power after the Spanish conquest of large parts of the Americas. Gold and silver moved from mines and colonial centers toward ports, and then across the Atlantic to Europe. Spanish fleets carried bullion, dyes, hides, sugar, tobacco, cacao, and other goods through a dangerous maritime world. Fortified cities such as Havana, Cartagena, Portobelo, and Veracruz became important nodes in a system of extraction and defense. A ship loaded with silver was not just a ship. It was a moving piece of empire. Other European powers wanted access to that wealth. England, France, and the Dutch Republic challenged Spanish control through war, trade, smuggling, colonization, and licensed raiding. Their governments often lacked the resources to patrol every ocean directly, so they turned to privateers. A privateer was not simply a pirate with better manners. He carried a legal commission, often called a letter of marque, allowing him to attack enemy shipping during wartime. To his own government, he could be useful. To his victims, he could look very much like a pirate. This distinction matters because the Caribbean pirate world grew from the blurred boundary between legal and illegal violence. A sailor who attacked Spanish ships under English authority during one war might find himself unemployed when peace arrived. A privateer's crew had weapons, experience, knowledge of sea routes, and a taste for prize money. When governments withdrew permission, some men stopped raiding. Others kept going. The line between servant of the crown and outlaw of the sea could shift with a treaty signed far away. The buccaneers were part of this earlier Caribbean world. The word came from hunters and meat smokers on islands such as Hispaniola, where men prepared meat on wooden frames and lived outside the neat control of empire. Over time, buccaneers became associated with raiding especially against Spanish targets. They were not identical to the later pirates of the Golden Age, but they helped create the Caribbean tradition of irregular maritime violence. They knew coasts, provisions, small vessels, and the weak points of colonial defense. Port Royal in Jamaica became one of the most famous centers of this raiding world in the 17th century. Under English control, it served as a base for privateers and buccaneers who attacked Spanish interests. The city gained a reputation for wealth, vice, violence, and opportunity. Taverns, warehouses, docks, brothels, merchants, officials, sailors, and captured goods all mixed in the same waterfront economy. Port Royal was not a fantasy pirate capital, but it was a real place where imperial rivalry made maritime raiding profitable. Henry Morgan, one of the most famous buccaneer leaders, shows the ambiguity of the age. He led devastating attacks against Spanish targets, including Panama, and became wealthy and celebrated in England. Later, he was knighted and served as lieutenant governor of Jamaica. To Spain, he was a brutal pirate. To England, at least at certain moments, he was a useful weapon against a rival empire. His career reminds us that piracy often depends on perspective, law, and political timing. The Caribbean itself helped raiders survive. Islands, shoals, hidden anchorages, mangroves, reefs, channels, and shifting winds made pursuit difficult. A fast vessel that knew local waters could slip away from heavier ships. Harbors could shelter smugglers and raiders. Remote coves could provide water, wood, and repairs. But the environment was also dangerous. Hurricanes destroyed fleets. Disease killed more men than sword or cannon. Heat, insects, rot, and hunger were constant companions. The romantic sea was also a place of decay. The ships of this world varied widely. Pirates and privateers did not always want the largest vessel. A smaller, faster ship could be more useful than a great warship if it could overtake merchants, escape naval patrols, enter shallow waters, and carry enough guns to intimidate prey. Sloops, brigantines, and other agile vessels could serve raiders well. A pirate ship was not simply a floating battlefield. It was a workplace, shelter, weapon, prison, and gambling table, crowded with men who depended on one another, but might not fully trust one another. The treasure that drew pirates was not always gold. Cargo could include sugar, rum, indigo, cloth, food, weapons, medicine, tools, coins, and enslaved people. Pirates wanted things that could be sold, consumed, traded, or used. The Hollywood chest of jewels existed as an image more often than a daily reality. A captured merchant ship might be valuable because of ordinary goods. A barrel of flour could matter more immediately than a silver coin if a crew was hungry. The Caribbean pirate story is inseparable from slavery. European colonies in the region depended heavily on enslaved African labor, especially in sugar production. Ships moved enslaved people through Atlantic networks of violence and profit. Pirates operated within this brutal world. Some attacked slave ships. Some enslaved or sold people. Some crews included black sailors, free and enslaved, who found different and often dangerous forms of space within pirate communities. The history cannot be made clean without erasing the world that created it. Piracy offered some sailors an escape from harsh naval and merchant service. Life aboard legal ships could be brutal. Low pay, poor food, disease, beatings, dangerous labor, and little control over conditions. Pirate crews sometimes offered better shares, more voice in shipboard decisions, and compensation for injury. This has led some historians to note unusually democratic elements in pirate organization. But those elements should not be mistaken for modern equality or innocence. Pirate life was violent, exploitative, unstable, and often short. Before the Black Flag became a legend then, the real foundations were already in place. Empire, war, trade, slavery, maritime labor, privateering, and opportunity. The pirates did not appear outside history. They were produced by the same Atlantic world that condemned them. They lived in the cracks between state violence and outlaw violence, between legal plunder and illegal plunder, between service and rebellion. The legend would come later. The sea that made it was already full of blood, gold, hunger, and wind. Buccaneers, privateers, and the empire of silver. The Caribbean pirate world cannot be understood without the Spanish empire of silver. For more than a century, Spanish-American wealth moved through ports, fleets, mule trains, warehouses, and convoy systems designed to bring treasure and trade goods safely across the Atlantic. Silver from mines in the Americas did not simply make Spain rich. It reshaped global commerce, helped fund wars, traveled through Europe and Asia, and drew the attention of every rival power watching Spanish ships cross the sea. Spain tried to protect this wealth through organization. Treasure fleets sailed in convoy rather than as isolated ships whenever possible. Fortifications guarded key ports. Bureaucrats tracked cargo, taxes, and legal trade. Naval escorts attempted to defend merchantmen from raiders, but the system was too large to be perfectly secure. The Caribbean contained countless islands, channels, and coastal approaches. Bad weather could scatter fleets. War could stretch defenses thin. Local officials could be corrupt or overwhelmed. Smugglers and raiders learned to live inside these gaps. Privateering became a tool of empire because it allowed governments to project violence without paying for a full navy. A private vessel could be armed, commissioned, and sent to prey on enemy trade. If it captured a legal prize, ship and cargo could be condemned by a prize court, and profits divided among owners, captains, crews, and sometimes officials. The system turned war into investment. It also taught generations of sailors how profitable raiding could be. For the men aboard these ships, motive was rarely pure patriotism. A privateer might speak of king and country, religion, or revenge against Spain, but prize money was central. Capturing a wealthy ship could change a sailor's life. The chance of profit attracted men who were already used to danger. It also encouraged aggression. When peace returned and privateering commissions became invalid, the habit of taking ships did not always disappear. The sea did not suddenly become orderly because diplomats had agreed to stop a war. The buccaneers of the 17th century developed in this world of weak borders and imperial rivalry. Many began as hunters or settlers outside formal colonial structures. They lived by killing wild cattle and pigs, smoking meat, trading hides, and moving between island economies. Their skills made them useful to raiding ventures. They knew how to provision themselves, travel lightly, cooperate in loose groups, and attack places that were not expecting formal armies. Over time, buccaneering became a form of organized plunder. The French, English, and Dutch all used irregular sea violence against Spain when it suited them. This does not mean the buccaneers were easy to control. Colonial governors might encourage raids during one moment and condemn them in another. Local merchants could profit from stolen goods while pretending to respect imperial law. The economy of raiding depended on buyers as well as attackers. A pirate who could not sell cargo or obtain supplies would not last long. Respectable ports and outlaw decks were more connected than they liked to admit. The Spanish saw many of these raiders as pirates regardless of the legal excuses offered by rival powers. From the Spanish point of view, a coastal town burned by English or French buccaneers was not comforted by paperwork. Raids could be savage. Towns were looted, hostages taken, churches robbed, prisoners tortured for information, and civilians terrorized. The pirate legend often softens this violence into daring adventure. The real Caribbean raiding world was frequently brutal against people who had no power over imperial policy. Henry Morgan's attack on Panama in 1671 became one of the most famous buccaneer operations. Morgan and his men crossed difficult terrain and struck a major Spanish city connected to the flow of Pacific silver. The attack was dramatic, destructive, and immensely profitable for some. It also created diplomatic complications because England and Spain were moving toward peace. Morgan was arrested and taken to England, but instead of permanent disgrace, he eventually returned to Jamaica with honor. His career shows how flexible morality could be when profit and politics met. Port Royal's prosperity depended on this ambiguity. A raid on Spanish shipping could bring goods, coins, and captives into a colonial economy. Merchants benefited. Taverns filled. Officials looked away or participated. The city's reputation for wickedness was not only moral gossip. It reflected the reality of a place where violence at sea became money on land. When Port Royal was devastated by an earthquake in 1692, later writers often described it as divine judgment. But historically, it was also the fall of a major node in the old buccaneer world. As the 17th century moved toward the 18th, the conditions that produced buccaneering changed. European powers expanded their Caribbean colonies. Sugar plantations grew more important. Naval organization improved. Imperial states became more interested in regulating their own maritime violence. Still, the skills, roots, habits, and myths of buccaneering fed into the later golden age of piracy. The older world of private war had created men who knew how to live by the gun, the sail, and the prize. The Empire of Silver also produced targets beyond treasure fleets. Small coastal traders, fishing vessels, slavers, plantation supply ships, and inter-island merchants all moved through the Caribbean. A pirate did not need to capture a Spanish galleon to survive. He could take food, rum, canvas, medicine, powder, tools, or a better ship. Many pirate attacks were practical rather than spectacular. The true economy of piracy was made of many smaller seizures, not endless mountains of gold. This practical raiding world explains why pirates often forced captured sailors to join them, or took skilled men such as carpenters, surgeons, navigators, and pilots. A ship needed expertise. A carpenter could repair damage. A surgeon could treat wounds. A pilot who knew a coast could be more valuable than treasure. Piracy was a crime, but it was also an organization of labor. The pirate crew had to function, or it would die. The Spanish treasure system remained a powerful symbol because it represented concentrated wealth moving through dangerous space. Even when pirates mostly captured smaller prizes, the dream of Spanish silver shaped imaginations. A treasure ship was the ultimate prize, the object that made men take risks and made governments fear the weakness of their sea lanes. The legend of Caribbean piracy would always glitter with silver, because silver was the metal that made the empire's arteries visible. Yet the real story is not simply pirates against empire. It is empire producing piracy. European states normalized violence at sea when it served them. They licensed raiders, encouraged attacks, bought stolen goods, and celebrated men who weakened enemies. Then, when the same methods threatened trade in peacetime, they called those men criminals. The pirate became an outlaw partly because empire changed the rules after teaching him the game. The Caribbean in this age was therefore a place where legality could be seasonal, political, and fragile. A captain might sail as a privateer in 1 year, a smuggler in another, and a pirate after that. A colonial governor might condemn piracy in public while profiting from it in private. A merchant might complain of theft while buying goods from thieves. The silver roots made the stakes high enough for everyone to compromise. Behind the romance of the Black Flag lies this older world of charters, commissions, prize courts, colonial rivalries, and imperial greed. Buccaneers and privateers did not simply precede pirates, they helped make piracy thinkable. They proved that ships could be taken, ports could be raided, officials could be bribed, and stolen goods could become ordinary commerce. The Golden Age would inherit their roots, their violence, and their contradictions. The Golden Age, Nassau, Blackbeard, and the Pirate Republic. The Golden Age of piracy is usually placed from the late 17th century into the early 18th century, with its most famous Caribbean phase flourishing after the War of the Spanish Succession ended in 1713. That peace left many sailors unemployed, including men who had served on privateers. At the same time, Atlantic trade continued to expand. Merchant ships crossed the seas, colonial authorities remained uneven, and naval suppression was not yet strong enough everywhere. The conditions were ready for piracy to surge. Nassau, in the Bahamas, became one of the most famous pirate bases of this period. Its harbor, location, shallow waters, and weak government made it attractive to pirates who needed shelter, supplies, repairs, and access to shipping routes. The Bahamas sat near important passages used by ships entering and leaving the Caribbean and the American colonies. A pirate operating from Nassau could watch the movement of commerce and retreat into waters difficult for large naval vessels to control. The so-called Pirate Republic of Nassau was not a formal state with laws like a modern republic. It was a loose pirate-dominated community where crews, captains, traders, families, deserters, and opportunists lived under unstable arrangements. Men such as Benjamin Hornigold, Charles Vane, and others were associated with this world. Nassau represented a breakdown of imperial authority. For a time, pirates could treat it as a home port, a market, and a symbol that the sea still had places beyond easy control. Pirate crews often used articles, written agreements that set rules for shares, discipline, compensation, and authority. These articles varied by crew, but they show that pirate ships were not simply mobs. Captains could be elected or removed, especially outside battle. Quartermasters could hold significant power as representatives of the crew. Shares of plunder were divided according to agreed formulas. Injured men might receive compensation. Such practices were unusual compared with the harsh hierarchy of naval and merchant vessels. This shipboard order has helped create the idea of pirates as rebels against tyranny. There is truth in that, but it should be handled carefully. Pirate democracy was mostly for the crew members accepted into the compact, not for all people they encountered. Pirates could be brutal to captives, enslaved people, civilians, and resisting crews. Their internal rules did not make them egalitarian saints. They were criminals who sometimes organized themselves more fairly than the legal maritime world they came from. Blackbeard, whose real name was Edward Teach or Thatch, became the most famous pirate of the Golden Age. He operated along the American coast and in the Caribbean, commanding the Queen Anne's Revenge, a captured French slave ship converted into a powerful pirate vessel. Blackbeard understood fear as a weapon. Later accounts describe him placing slow-burning fuses under his hat or in his beard to create a terrifying image in battle. Whether every detail is embellished or not, his reputation was carefully theatrical. Blackbeard's most famous act of intimidation came when he blockaded Charleston in 1718, taking hostages and demanding medical supplies. This was not treasure hunting romance. It was coercion against a colonial port. Later that year, he was killed in a battle with forces sent from Virginia, led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. His head was displayed as a warning. Blackbeard's career was short, but his image became immense because he combined violence, spectacle, and the perfect name for legend. Other pirates also shaped the age. Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, captured hundreds of ships and became one of the most successful pirates of the period. Unlike the chaotic drunkard stereotype, Roberts was known in some accounts for discipline and style. Anne Bonny and Mary Read became famous female pirates associated with the crew of Calico Jack Rackham, though their lives are filtered through sensational accounts. Their stories endure because they disrupt the assumption that the pirate world was exclusively male, even though women aboard pirate ships were rare. Stede Bonnet, sometimes called the gentleman pirate, offers a stranger image. A wealthy landowner from Barbados, he turned to piracy despite lacking the usual background of maritime hardship. His career was erratic, and he became associated with Blackbeard before being captured and hanged. Bonnet's life reminds us that piracy attracted not only desperate sailors, but also unusual men whose motives could include frustration, ambition, instability, or fantasy. The Jolly Roger, the black flag marked with skulls, bones, skeletons, hourglasses, or weapons, became a tool of psychological warfare. Pirate flags varied, and not all were the same skull and crossbones familiar today. Their purpose was to terrify victims into surrendering without a fight. If a merchant crew surrendered quickly, pirates could take the ship with less risk. If victims resisted, pirates might use violence as punishment and warning. The flag was theater, but theater with cannon behind it. The Golden Age pirate ship was a dangerous workplace. Crews needed food, water, ammunition, sails, rope, medicine, carpentry, navigation, and discipline. Captured ships might be stripped, released, burned, or absorbed. Prisoners might be threatened, beaten, forced to reveal hidden goods, or invited or compelled to join. Pirate crews included men from different nations and backgrounds, including Europeans, Africans, and people from colonial ports. Some black sailors joined pirate crews, though their freedom and status varied and must not be romanticized beyond the evidence. Piracy spread beyond the Caribbean. Atlantic pirates operated along the North American coast, West Africa, the Indian Ocean, and other routes. Some of the most famous pirate careers moved through several regions. The Caribbean remained central in popular memory because of its islands, treasure routes, colonial ports, and later storytelling. But the pirate world was part of a wider maritime crisis in the Age of Empire. Imperial governments eventually responded with more force. The British Crown offered pardons to pirates who surrendered, while also sending naval power and royal governors to restore control. Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau in 1718 as royal governor with the mission of suppressing piracy. Some pirates accepted pardons. Others returned to crime. Some were hunted down, captured, and hanged. The pirate republic could not survive sustained imperial attention. The Golden Age burned brightly because it rested on temporary conditions, war-trained sailors, weak colonial enforcement, valuable trade, available bases, and uncertain naval control. Once those conditions changed, piracy became harder. A pirate needed safe harbors, markets, recruits, and room to disappear. Empires learned to close those spaces. The pirate's freedom depended on gaps in authority. When authority became more coordinated, the gaps narrowed. Nassau, Blackbeard, and the Black Flag became legendary because they belonged to the brief moment when outlaws seemed able to challenge the sea lanes of empire. But their world was smaller, harsher, and shorter than the myth suggests. The Golden Age did not last for generations. Many pirate careers lasted only months or a few years. The legend is long because the lives were brief, violent, and vivid enough to be retold endlessly. Life at sea, violence, democracy, disease, and survival. Life aboard a pirate ship was not a continuous adventure. It was cramped, wet, dirty, anxious, and dangerous. The deck that looks romantic in paintings was a workplace where men hauled lines, patched sails, pumped water, cleaned weapons, watched horizons, cooked poor food, argued over shares, treated wounds, and waited for wind. A ship at sea was never fully safe. Wood rotted, water spoiled, storms broke masts, disease spread quickly. A small mistake could kill a man before an enemy ever appeared. Many pirates came from the harsh world of merchant and naval labor. Legal ships could be brutal places. Sailors endured low wages, delayed pay, bad food, beatings, impressment, disease, and rigid hierarchy. A pirate crew could seem attractive because it offered shares of plunder and some voice in governance. The promise was not comfort. It was risk with the possibility of reward and a measure of autonomy. For men accustomed to command without consent, even a violent outlaw ship could look like a different bargain. Pirate articles governed life aboard many ships. These agreements might regulate shares, gambling, lights out rules, weapons readiness, compensation for injury, and punishment for theft from the crew. A captain could hold strong authority during chase and battle, when hesitation could be fatal. But outside combat, the crew might have more power than sailors aboard legal ships. The quartermaster could act as a counterweight to the captain. This division of power was one of the most distinctive features of pirate organization. Compensation for injury reveals the practical side of pirate solidarity. A man who lost an arm, leg, eye, or finger might receive a specified payment from the common stock before shares were divided. This was not modern humanitarianism, but it acknowledged that pirate life exposed men to bodily ruin. A wounded sailor could become useless in ordinary employment. Compensation helped make risk acceptable. It also showed that the crew understood itself as a dangerous partnership. Violence remained central. Pirates used intimidation to make victims surrender, but they also beat, tortured, or killed when it suited their goals, or when they wanted to create a reputation. Captains who resisted could be punished harshly. Crews might be abused for hiding valuables. Some pirates claimed to treat cooperative captives well and brutal captains badly, especially captains known for mistreating sailors. Even when such claims were true, they did not erase the violence of robbery itself. Pirates were not merely social critics with sails. Weapons shaped daily readiness. Pistols, cutlasses, boarding axes, muskets, pikes, and cannon all had roles. Boarding was terrifying. Smoke, splinters, shouting, blood, and confusion filled close quarters. Cannon fire could destroy rigging, smash hulls, and turn wood into deadly fragments. A pirate preferred surrender because battle was costly. The black flag existed partly to avoid the fight it threatened. Fear was efficient. Food and water were constant concerns. Fresh water could become foul. Salt meat, hard bread, beans, fish, and whatever could be seized or bought made up much of the diet. Malnutrition and scurvy were dangers, though sailors developed practical knowledge about fresh foods when available. Rum and other alcohol played roles in morale, trade, and disorder. Hunger could make discipline collapse. A ship that could not provision itself was finished. Disease was one of the greatest killers. Tropical fevers, infections, dysentery, wounds, parasites, and shipboard illness could devastate crews. Surgeons were valuable, and pirates sometimes forced medical men to serve. Medicines were limited. A wound that modern treatment might save could become fatal. The smell of a ship, the heat below deck, the presence of rats, lice, damp clothing, and spoiled food all belonged to the real pirate environment. The romance of the sea rarely includes infection, but the archive does. Navigation required skill. Pirates needed pilots who knew coasts, currents, reefs, and harbor approaches. Charts, compasses, sounding lines, experience, and memory-guided movement. A pirate crew that captured a pilot could gain access to dangerous waters or hidden routes. Knowledge of place could be as valuable as gold. The Caribbean rewarded men who understood shallow channels and punished those who did not. Pirate ships were multicultural by necessity and circumstance. Crews might include English, Irish, Welsh, French, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Africans, and colonial-born sailors. Communication, hierarchy, and trust had to be negotiated in this mixed environment. Some pirates accepted men who had fled slavery or coercive labor, but pirate ships also operated within and sometimes profited from the slave system. The presence of diversity does not make the pirate world morally simple. It makes it historically complex. Women were rare aboard pirate ships, but not absent from pirate history. Anne Bonny and Mary Read became famous because they entered a world from which women were usually excluded, and because their stories were sensationalized. They reportedly fought disguised as men and were captured with Calico Jack Rackham's crew. Much of what is known comes from sources that mix fact, rumor, and dramatic storytelling. Their fame reveals both the reality of exceptional women and the appetite for extraordinary pirate tales. The idea of pirate freedom must be handled with care. Pirates rejected certain forms of authority, especially the harsh discipline of naval and merchant service. They created shipboard systems that gave crewmen more power than legal sailors often had. But they lived by theft, coercion, and violence. Their freedom was built partly on the suffering of others. They could be rebels against one hierarchy while participating in another. That contradiction is one reason pirates remain fascinating and uncomfortable. Punishment aboard pirate ships could be severe. Theft from the crew, desertion, cowardice, or betrayal might be punished by marooning, whipping, shooting, or other violence. Marooning, leaving a man on an isolated shore with minimal supplies, became one of the most feared punishments. Pirate discipline had to be strong enough to keep a criminal community functional. Without trust, even among thieves, the ship would not survive. Most pirates did not retire rich. Many were killed, drowned, hanged, pardoned, returned to ordinary work, or disappeared from the record. The dream of buried treasure is one of the great exaggerations of pirate legend. Pirates usually spent, divided, traded, or consumed what they took. Burying wealth was not a normal business model. A pirate wanted money, drink, food, repairs, weapons, and pleasure now, because the future was uncertain. Life at sea made the pirate myth possible because it compressed human extremes into a small wooden world. Violence and democracy, greed and solidarity, fear and freedom, disease and celebration, discipline and mutiny, all existed close together. The pirate ship was not a utopia and not merely a floating gang. It was a harsh, alternative society created by men who had learned that the Atlantic world itself was violent. Their legend survives because, for a brief time, they seemed to seize that violence for themselves. The end of the pirates and the birth of the myth. The golden age of piracy ended because empires learned to close the spaces that had allowed pirates to flourish. Safe harbors were denied or occupied. Naval patrols increased. Governors were pressured to stop tolerating pirates. Pardons divided crews between those willing to surrender and those determined to continue. Prize markets became harder to access. Captured pirates were tried and hanged in public as warnings. The sea did not become peaceful, but the particular world of the Caribbean pirate republics began to shrink. Woodes Rogers's arrival in Nassau in 1718 marked one of the clearest turning points. As royal governor of the Bahamas, he offered pardons to pirates who accepted royal authority and pursued those who refused. Some famous pirates took the pardon, at least temporarily. Others rejected it and continued raiding. The strategy worked because it split the pirate community. Men who were tired, frightened, or practical could step back from outlaw life. Those who remained became easier to isolate. Naval power mattered. A pirate ship could intimidate merchants, but it could not easily survive sustained pursuit by organized states. Warships, colonial courts, informants, fortified ports, and coordinated patrols made piracy more dangerous. The same governments that had once encouraged privateering now wanted stable trade. Insurance, merchant pressure, imperial revenue, and colonial order all demanded suppression. Pirates had become bad for business. Public executions helped turn pirates into warnings. Men convicted of piracy could be hanged near harbors or displayed in chains where sailors would see them. The body of Captain William Kidd was famously gibbeted after his execution in England, though Kidd's own story belongs to the blurred world of privateering, politics, and piracy. Such displays were meant to strip away romance. The state wanted the pirate remembered not as a free man, but as a criminal corpse. Yet suppression created legend as much as fear. Trial records, execution sermons, newspapers, pamphlets, and popular books carried pirate names to readers who would never go to sea. The more authorities described pirate crimes, the more vivid pirates became in public imagination. A hanging could end a man's life while beginning his afterlife as a story. The state tried to make examples. The public turned some examples into characters. One of the most important sources for pirate legend was a general history of the pirates, first published in the 1720s under the name Captain Charles Johnson. The authorship remains debated, but the book shaped how later generations imagined Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, Bartholomew Roberts, and others. It mixed information, moral judgment, drama, and possibly embellishment. Many pirate stories known today passed through this text. The line between history and literature was already being drawn in ink. Over time, literature transformed pirates further. 18th and 19th century writers turned them into villains, rebels, adventurers, comic figures, and symbols of forbidden freedom. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, published in the 19th century, gave the world some of its most enduring pirate imagery: buried treasure, maps, one-legged seamen, tropical islands, and dangerous charisma. Much of what people think of as classic pirate atmosphere owes more to later fiction than to everyday Golden Age reality. The stay and later film added more layers. Pirate accents, theatrical costumes, parrots, plank walking, treasure maps, and comic swagger became part of popular memory. Some details had historical roots, while others were exaggerated, invented, or shifted from one context to another. The pirate became a costume that could be recognized instantly. The real men had been dirty, desperate, violent, and often doomed. The fictional pirate became strangely charming. The Caribbean itself became part of the myth because its landscape is so visually powerful. Blue water, white beaches, green islands, reefs, forts, palms, storms, and harbors create a dreamlike setting. But the beauty of the setting can hide the brutality of the history. The same Caribbean world that produced pirate legend also contained plantation slavery, imperial warfare, disease, forced migration, and colonial exploitation. A truthful pirate history must let the beauty and violence remain together. The end of the pirate age did not end maritime crime. Smuggling, privateering, naval war, illegal trade, and piracy continued in different forms across the world. But the specific Golden Age image of Caribbean piracy became fixed because it belonged to a concentrated moment. A few decades when imperial rivalry, unemployed sailors, weak enforcement, and Atlantic trade allowed outlaws to become famous. Its brevity helped make it memorable. A long, ordinary history often fades. A short, violent episode becomes legend. Pirates also became symbols because they seemed to stand outside society. The pirate refuses the navy, the merchant captain, the plantation owner, the customs officer, and the king. This refusal is part of the appeal. But historically, pirates never fully escaped the society they rejected. They needed markets, ports, weapons, ships, stolen labor, and imperial trade routes. They were parasites on empire as much as rebels against it. Without empire, Caribbean piracy, as we know it, could not have existed. Their internal organization also fed the myth. Elected captains, shared plunder, compensation for injuries, and crew articles made pirates seem radically free compared with ordinary sailors. These practices were real enough to matter, but the legend often detaches them from robbery and terror. Pirates could share power among themselves while denying mercy to others. Their shipboard democracy was narrow, violent, and temporary. It deserves attention, not worship. Blackbeard's afterlife shows how myth transforms terror into image. In life, he was feared because fear made victims surrender. In memory, he becomes almost theatrical. Smoking beard, dark eyes, pistols, swords, and a burning deck. The terrifying performance he cultivated became the reason later audiences wanted to see him again and again. He turned himself into a weapon, and history turned the weapon into a character. Anne Bonny and Mary Read also show how legend selects. Their stories are retold because they disrupt expectations of gender in a male maritime world. They are fascinating, but their fame can sometimes flatten the many unnamed women affected by piracy, empire, slavery, and colonial life. Legend loves the exceptional figure. History asks us to remember the surrounding world as well. By the time the pirate became a children's costume, a tavern song, a film character, and a theme of adventure, much of the real context had been softened. The rope, rot, fever, hunger, coercion, and gallows faded. The map, chest, flag, and sword remained. This is how myths often work. They preserve the shape of danger after draining away much of the pain. The pirate became safe enough to enjoy because the real pirate age was over. The true history behind the legend is more interesting than the fantasy because it explains why the fantasy exists. Pirates were products of a violent Atlantic world. They emerged from empire, war, labor abuse, privateering, slavery, trade, and weak authority. They created harsh but unusual shipboard societies. They frightened merchants and governors. They died young. Then writers, courts, newspapers, and storytellers transformed them into symbols of freedom, danger, and forbidden life. The black flag still moves in the imagination because it means more than one thing. It means robbery and murder. It means resistance to discipline. It means the sea beyond the law. It means empire's shadow. It means a warning on the horizon. It means the dream of escape and the fact that escape can become violence. The real pirates of the Caribbean were not heroes from a storybook, but neither were they simple monsters detached from their world. They were men and women produced by an age that had already made the ocean a place of plunder. And so the legend remains. A lantern swinging over a dark deck, a sail against moonlight, a fort watching the harbor, a black flag lifting in the wind. Behind that image is the true history. Silver fleets, private commissions, enslaved labor, hungry sailors, Nassau streets, disease, cannon smoke, courts, gallows, and books that turned criminals into myth. The pirates passed quickly across the sea. But the story they left behind has never stopped sailing.